Hi, everybody. My name is Evan.
And I'm Scott.
We're both Baptist pastors, and this is our podcast about the Bible. But you don't have to worry, because we're not trying to save your souls. We won't be telling you what to believe or how to behave, and we promise never to invite you to church. We just like to talk about the Bible, what it actually says, where it probably came from, and how it's been understood or not by different people in different times and places.
And today we are going to be looking at Acts chapter 10. It's a story about Peter and a man named Cornelius, and a fascinating, profound chapter, and looking forward to this discussion.
Today we talk about how God relates to outsiders. We talk about cognitive dissonance and mystical experiences, and we talk about thumbs up evangelism. We're excited that Jay Kennedy could join us as our guest today. His first time on the podcast, but a long-time friend of the show. Welcome to the Unholy Bible Study Podcast. Well, Jay, welcome to the Unholy Bible Study Podcast. This is your first time in front of the cameras, although you've been here as we've recorded some episodes before. Would you be willing to introduce yourself, to share a little bit about your background or who you are for our listeners?
Right. Well, I don't know if I'm a colleague anymore since I've retired, but...
I don't think you ever stopped being a colleague if you've been a pastor.
Yeah. So I was born and raised here in Indianapolis and on the west side and the burb of Eagledale, and went to an American Baptist church there, born and raised in an American Baptist church, and then became an American Baptist pastor, not because I wanted to, but felt like that's what I needed to do. Wanted to give kids an opportunity.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, I wanted to give kids an opportunity to ask questions, because in my church, that wasn't looked upon. And we were told we don't ask those kinds of questions. And in my head, I think probably, because you're into Sunday school all the time and all the other stuff. So when we were told that, I was like, well, we ask them, you just don't answer them. And so
That's a good observation.
I had tons of questions, and I'd always try to find answers. And even as a little kid, and I'd hear the pastor, I would read the Bible, and I was like, I don't think that's what that says. So I had the audacity at starting in sixth grade I read the Bible through every year for the next 4 years. And especially on things like Revelation, I would because we had guys.
You said this started in high school?
No, in sixth grade.
In sixth grade?
Sixth grade, okay. I started reading the Bible all the way through.
Okay.
And I'd be like, this sounds different when you read the whole thing, and especially because we had prophecy conferences. People come in and
you
say,
had prophecy
oh
conferences
my gosh,
too?
yes, yeah.
I didn't know this was. I thought that was just Scott's
no.
church.
They would come in and just like revivals, because we had revivals. You bring in a special preacher.
So what's the difference between a revival and
Well,
a
a revival is
prophecy?
trying to get everybody saved, or in most situations resaved, because it's not like people showed up for that. It was just and then people go forward again and all that kind of stuff. But a prophecy conference, they were trying to get you ready for the end times. And that's where, of course, you heard, the guilt trip, that if you don't lead your friends to Jesus, then you're letting them go to hell, all that kind of stuff. So I started reading Revelation, even at 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and I was like, that doesn't sound like what it says at all. So it just intrigued me, and I had all these questions. And then it wasn't until I got to my sophomore year in college where things transitioned, and I was in a safe space, shockingly, because a lot of my college friends were like, I hate this because they're forcing us to ask these questions. And I was like, these are the same
Finally.
questions I've been asking
Yeah.
my entire life.
I'm
And
not the
someone's
only one.
got the integrity. Yeah, my professors are like, so
What kind of college did you go to?
I went to Greenville College, it's a university now. So it's a Free Methodist
Okay.
school.
So you mentioned children. When you became a pastor, you wanted children to feel free to ask
Kids,
questions.
teenagers to ask
Okay.
questions.
Were you working primarily, or did you want to work primarily with young people, or
Well,
were you just thinking about?
Yeah, it was weird. I lead a very disorganized life, and things just kind of emerge, and I'm like, well, I find myself there. But I wanted to give kids, I had that deep passion to give kids an opportunity to ask their deepest questions.
Yeah.
And it mainly centered upon faith, but about everything else, like any kid wondering about sex or, all the other stuff about life and that. And they did. They asked some amazing questions, which Jan and I, my wife, laugh about those because she was involved in them. And
Yeah. I've heard a lot of adults talk about adults, especially who are raised in as Christians, or especially kind of evangelical or conservative Christians, but not just the most conservative kinds. I've often heard adults say when they went to college, it was like a whole new world opened up, or like I finally saw beyond like the walls of my church or my childhood home. It was like, oh, there's a whole world out here.
yeah.
And I've sometimes said one of my goals as a parent and as a pastor is to make sure people know early that there's a whole world out there. Like,
exactly.
This is not the be all end all. This is not the only way to think about the world or about God or about our lives together. So that I want to help people avoid that moment of shock because it can be really exciting. It can be really compelling for people. Like, that's not always a bad feeling. But I think for some people it's kind of scary. And then they end up retreating back into the safe little world.
Yeah,
they
see,
knew.
and I never have understood that. And you and I had talked about it before, and Scott knows this from our history of going to Attucks High School and being one of the first white kids in a predominantly black school. And it wasn't frightening for me. It was like, oh my gosh, this is what the world's like. It's not like it is in Eagledale, where it's just very, very small and narrow, or my church. It's like, this is what black people do. And I would go into their homes, and there was a black Jesus. And I was like, oh, yeah, because he wasn't white.
It was probably more accurate.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I was like, well, this is fascinating. And, just all this different thing. And then, of course, when I went to Earlham my freshman year, with Quakers and the peace movement and all that, and in the midst of the Vietnam War, people are saying that that's wrong. And I'm like, in my world, I hear Walter Cronkite on the TV, and then everybody's like, we got to fight those commies. And I was like, I don't understand why we are. And the Quakers were like, we actually don't need to do that. I was like, wow, this is awesome. Which is why I love seminary so much, because ultimately at seminary, I was required to do my research, but then I could do research. And because I was full-time as a pastor, then in some sense, or as a youth pastor, I was getting paid to do the research that I always wanted to do. And I was like, this is awesome.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Now, am I getting this right? I know you and Scott have known each other for years. Did you meet in seminary?
We met in seminary. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then we're colleagues here in Indianapolis for years. And actually, we've known each other for a while.
Yes.
Almost 15 years at this point, 13 years.
Yeah, so it would have been 88, right?
When we graduated.
I mean,
84 is when we, because I started the semester before you. I started in the spring of 84, and you came in the fall of 84.
Yeah,
and we graduated in 88.
But we just clicked, and
I had to get past his Appalachian roots, although it's my wife's roots, but to meet somebody else that still had that massive accent back in the day, it was like, whew. Yeah.
You assume you know a lot about a person just
Yeah.
because of the way they
Yes,
talk. And
exactly.
then you find out people from Appalachia are just as
Yeah.
diverse
Have
as
questions
everybody
too,
else. Yeah.
and can wrestle with it. And it's like, well, that's awesome. So, yeah.
I don't know if this is a question you'd want to answer, but what did you like about being a pastor? Was that a calling, a vocation that always felt natural to you?
No, I didn't want to do it. And in retrospect, at this stage in my life, I often wonder how that came to be.
Huh.
Because in my heart, I'm a coach, an encourager, and I think I could have just as easily been a teacher and a coach, and I would have been happy as a clam, because I always felt, I just felt that there's something cockeyed about the church, and I hated propping up an institution. Never been an institutional kind of guy, and which is when I got hired to represent the region and to be a pastoral coach in a sense.
Yeah.
My first statement to my boss, Joan, was, I'm not going to prop up ABC. I want pastors to be successful pastors. I want them to be healthy. I want them to read because I think that's important, and to be willing to have a functional, thriving congregation. That's what was important to me.
Sure.
So for me personally, I really didn't care about the church, and I got told that by a lot of my parishioners that
They thought you should have cared more.
yeah, I should
Or-
have done more of the little things to make it. Yeah, and I just never had an interest in that. But what I did do, and what I think that they always balked against, is that these are the parameters for us to be healthy. And I'm going to call us out if we dare to go outside those. So if we have unhealthy conversations, or if we have processes that are lead to dysfunction, or if someone dominates, because you have to have your business meetings, and this person everybody knows is going to dominate, shut it down, and it was like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to be healthy. We're going to talk to each other, not past each other, and we're going to strive to have a healthy relationship. And we're going to get to know each other, which that drove them crazy too, because eventually we just jettisoned all meetings. But when we did gather together, we were not going to walk away from that without knowing each other more intimately.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, this is not important. We need to talk about last week's minutes. I'm like, no, we actually don't need to do that. So
the relationships were
yeah,
more
that was primary. Right.
the only thing maybe that
Yeah.
felt important.
Right. And so again, going back, I when I graduated from Greenville, by accident or God's providence, however you want to view it, is that I was a youth pastor, and I wanted those kids to try to have good relationships with their mom and dad, with each other, and then to believe that somehow their faith could be translated, that they can make a difference in their high school. That because they would say, high school's this. That time, the Breakfast Club just came out.
The movie.
And, the movie. Yeah. And a lot of my kids were like, this is what it's like. The day to day is like this. So I was like, well, then how can you change that? It was obviously your life's not a movie. When they start getting together at the end of the Breakfast Club and see past their Appalachian roots and those kinds of things. So how do you do that? And does that matter if you call yourself a person of faith?
Yeah.
Because again, I wasn't interested, like much to their parents' chagrin, of getting them saved and dunked. That just seemed to naturally happen. I wanted them to say, I can make a difference in my high school, that it can be flourishing instead of scary.
Cool.
So,
Thanks
yeah.
for sharing.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about being a coach and an encourager, and you were one of the first people we talked to about this project last year when we had kind of just started talking about the podcast or just started making plans to record a few episodes. And you've certainly been one of our strongest encouragers and a great coach through the process and an incredible supporter in lots of ways. And have allowed us to do this in ways we could not have imagined when we first started having those conversations. So I hope you know how grateful we are for all the support, but I'm curious why. What was it about this project that caught your attention?
Well, if I can share a personal story.
It's fine with me.
Yeah, well, it involves Scott.
It's fine with him too.
Yeah. And it's not like it's a secret for anybody that knows us. Even in seminary, I told you that he's not wired to be a pastor. And I always feared, of just out of friendship, that you're going to be attacked and eaten alive. And I didn't want that for you because I know how brutal the church could be. And in our many conversations, you go, but we're supposed to be Christian. And I was like, but that's not how it works. You've got to operate in a different level. And I knew you would struggle with that.
You're right.
And I was right. And so, but your frustration was always, how do I express what's inside of me? This, as you always said, this burning in your bones, just like Jeremiah. Which I get. I understand that. And I could, for lack of a better word, I could play the game. I could do the church stuff and be all right. But I sense that same burning, that passion. And that's why I was like, you either need to be teaching, you need to be writing books. And now, lo and behold, we have podcasts.
Yeah.
Where you can put it out there. And so from that, I think, well, I wish we'd had podcasts in 88 that you could have done this, because to me, your passion for the word, for your vision of what it means to be a person of faith is there. And as I've gotten to know you and talking about that, I thought the two of you talking together is just got to be a good thing. If nothing else, it's going to be humorous, funny. And it has been
Sometimes more than others.
Yeah. And it has been for me.
Sometimes on purpose.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And then the other side of it is for Nick, as I've seen Nick for his entire life, and I know that he has gifts and skills, and I wanted him to be able to learn new things, and lack of a better word, put that on his resume that I've done this. I've produced a podcast, and I've always wanted to, again, help people be in that position to learn, to grow, and to flourish. That's my word. I want people to flourish. And I think there's a lot of crap in this world that keeps people. We hear things and we buy into it. We can't. We don't. And if I can make that happen, or I can stand on the sideline and say, you can do this. I've seen it in my entire life. I've seen people step into that they never, ever believed that they could. So
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Scott, anything you want to add or any questions you would ask before we turn to the Bible?
No, I do want to say having a friend to travel, along the journey of faith, especially, having gone to seminary and me trying to be a pastor. But I think looking back over, my goodness, 40 years, has it been close? It is 40 years.
Yeah, 84.
Closing in on it.
Yeah, it's 40
More than.
years. I can see how, the Bible has a verse, iron sharpens iron. and it sounds like a cliche, but it's true. I mean, I think sometimes if people heard us having our conversations like in a coffee shop, they might think we're having a fight
Uh-huh.
because of the level of passion that we have. But it's not like that in our hearts. It's this passion for ideas that we both think are transformative, and we actually think that those ideas are in here,
Uh-huh.
and and
Yeah, because it's not been uncommon for us when we get together to pull out our phones, or you on occasion to even bring your Bible to just having coffee and getting together.
That's
And
how you know
yeah,
somebody's real cool.
yeah, you and just flipping through there and all of that. And I don't know about Megan, but for Jen, she doesn't. She stopped asking a long time ago. What'd you guys talk about? Because she knows what we
Yeah.
talk theology. We talk about how does this make any sense? And
She's just grateful you have someone else
Yes.
to talk.
instead of her in the morning coffee going,
Yeah.
I'll run across something. I'll text Jay. I'm like, Jay, we have to get together and talk about this. Like, it's,
Yeah.
this is a big deal.
Yeah. Those friendships mean so much.
Mhm.
And you picked the passage we're talking about today. When we have a guest, we try to find something that resonates with their interests. If they're a person of faith or somebody who's really familiar with the Bible, we often just ask what they want to talk about. And you suggested Acts chapter 10. What was it? Was it a hard decision? Was it a coin toss, or was it immediately apparent that that's what you
Well,
wanted to talk about?
yeah, growing up studying the Bible, and there's a bazillion things that fascinate me, but just from a practical standpoint, Acts 10 has always been intriguing. One, with the idea of Cornelius and a God fear that
Uh-huh.
God responds to, not a Jew. And that in itself was always intriguing. The mystical side of how this stuff happens and how one might tap into that is intriguing to me. But then what Peter says, his opening lines have just are simple. And I think that we've fabricated our faith, or we've made our faith so much that we ignore the just very, very simple things,
Yeah.
easy things.
So
I-
this encapsulates for you some of the key ideas, some of the most important
And for me,
ideas.
yeah, Evan, I think that's part of it. If you ask me if I pulled something out that is descriptive of the good news,
Uh-huh.
what the good news actually is, and it's actually good news, not just when I say it's good news, but it's really kind of not so good news. I would say just read Acts 10. Acts 10, I think, is good news. This is awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's try to set it up a little bit for listeners who might not be as familiar with the New Testament or the Christian scriptures at all. We've talked about Acts before, so we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about this book. We've done Acts 5 just a few weeks ago, so we've talked about kind of where this book came from, when it was written. It tells the story of the early church after Jesus had left. So we have stories like the gift of the Holy Spirit to Jewish followers of Jesus at Pentecost. And this represents kind of a major turning point in the narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
Scott, what do people need to know to understand what's going on in this story? We've got some major characters. We've got Peter, again, who has dominated the narrative up till now. And this story also revolves around him as well, right?
This passage is, for me, like it communicates in my mind what the Christian scriptures are all about. This is like the fulcrum for me of the biblical story.
I don't think it's exaggerating to say this is a hinge on which the entire, not just the scriptures, not just the book of Acts, but this story is when the Christian movement starts becoming what it will become, when it goes from being a Jewish sect into what we now know becomes a global phenomenon, a 2,000-year independent religious tradition that is not just comprised of Jewish people. And that's kind of that's the ball that starts rolling in this passage.
And it does that without, I think this is something that I think that 2,000 years of church has struggled with, the anti-Jewish sentiment in the Gentile church shows up pretty quickly. And it's showing up in the first century. And then the church has had these horrible anti-Jewish streaks all throughout history, culminating in something like the Holocaust. Which was justified by Christian theologians, right? I mean, that's just the truth. But I think you can't read this chapter and justify that kind of thinking. It's not saying this is an alternative to Judaism. I think what it's doing is showing how this is all one grand story. And that,
or even leaving something necessarily behind. It's like the common thought that, well, this is really the church, when it's not saying we're leaving this. It's like, oh, I didn't realize it's also this.
Yeah, it's beyond. It's more than.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, just my experience, we tend to think in exclusivist terms as Christians. I think we tend to think of in exclusivist terms no matter what group we're a part of. We have a hard time seeing the other in any objective sense at all. We always look through the lens of our own prejudices, and not prejudices in necessarily negative, but we all have these ideas, ways of thinking that we bring to the table.
I do think so. Sometimes people have read the book of Acts. Sometimes Christians have read the book of Acts, which tells, like I said, it tells the story of the early church. And some people have said that the Jewish people rejected Jesus. That Jesus came to his people, to the nation of Israel, and yet. And Acts often uses the phrase that the Jews killed him, that the Jewish leaders, that the Jewish community was responsible for Jesus' death. So some people have said that the story is that the Jewish people rejected Jesus, and so God turned to the Gentiles. That's why, God said, I'll go get my church somewhere else. And I don't think you can justify that. Like, there are some troubling hints in the book of Acts. And even in this chapter, I think you have that language of the Jews killing Jesus. But you still have there is no explicit sense in the book of Acts that God is rejecting the Jewish people or this covenant that had been established thousands of years before for them to be God's chosen people. It's like you said, it's an addition to, not instead of. So what is if you didn't have the Bible in front of you, or if you couldn't just point someone to this chapter, how would you tell the story? What happens in this narrative?
Why don't you?
Yeah, tell us the story.
There's a tough guy, Cornelius, because he's the head of a Roman cohort. So he's got to have something about him. He's not going to get that position by,
At minimum,
he's got at least 100.
Yeah. Just by going like,
Maybe a seal.
And he's a leader. Yeah. So he's a leader of men. And when he says things, people do it. He's used to that. But somehow, some way, he is a God-fearer.
Yeah, we've got to talk about this later.
Yeah.
But.
And so he has a vision, And the vision is go check out, you need to talk to this guy or have this guy, Peter, come and talk to you. I'm assuming he doesn't know who he is at all. So at the next day, he sends his people, they go. Sends 2 servants and a soldier, which I think is another interesting thing, how that soldier was interpreting all it. But anyway, so
I hadn't even noticed that detail.
yeah. And so they go, and Peter is getting ready for lunch the next day. And so they're in Caesarea, which is out on the lake, which is a beautiful place, by the way. I've been there. And I mean, I don't know, it was like 2,000 years ago, but now
But it was at least as nice, maybe nicer.
So they go, and Peter is getting ready for lunch, goes up on the roof to pray, and in his prayer, he has a vision, and a sheet comes down with lots of animals on it and reptiles, which I got creeped out when I was reading again. I was like, maybe turtle soup. I don't know.
Sure, that's the thing.
So yeah, I guess that maybe that'd be okay. And he says, I can't eat that because basically I follow the Jewish law. I'm not allowed to eat that. And then in the vision, don't eat anything or don't call anything unclean that I have declared clean. Which, and it hasn't actually happened. It's just the sheet that comes down. So that happens 3 times. And while he's in the midst of that, there's a knock on the door, and they're told, Peter, there's some guys here to see you. So he comes down, and shockingly, all the rules go out the window because he just says, come on in.
Yeah.
And what's the scoop? And it says, our leader, Cornelius, wants you to come, and we've come to get you.
Yeah.
And he goes.
And you do have to know, like, so Jewish laws would have encompassed things like what animals you could eat and what animals you couldn't eat. There were clean and unclean animals.
Or even touch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there were also laws about what kind of people you could sit down at a table with, shake hands with, who you could invite into your home. And kind of one of the baseline rules is Jewish people don't associate with Gentiles. So a Greek centurion, even one who's an upstanding member of the community, a devout religious person, would not normally be allowed into a Jewish home. So that's kind of the background to this. And Peter invites them right in, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, there's got to be neighbors that are going, what?
That was a Gentile. I know that was a Gentile. Looked like a Gentile, walked like a Gentile.
So, so they come in, and the next day they go, and Peter takes some other fellow Jews with him, and they go, and
I love that Cornelius has invited his whole family,
yes,
and his friends. Like it's there's a whole gathering there
it's
when
a big
Peter
deal
arrives.
thing,
yeah.
They're all waiting.
Yeah.
It's because
something important is about
and
to
I'm
happen.
thinking it's because he's used to, when I say something, this is the way it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I sent my guy. He's going to bring him back. That's the way it is. So they're all there waiting, comes in, and then he does a very, like, oh my gosh, this has all happened. And he bows down, and Peter says, no, I'm just a man like you are, which I think is an incredible phrase, because Peter, I think a lot of times gets a bad rap, and this could have been his opportunity to go, it's me. I've showed up. And he says, I'm just a man just like you are. And so why'd you call me? And he tells him about his dream and says, I just want to hear. And so then this speech comes in. And
kind of a summary of the Christian gospel, the whole, the thesis of this Christian community that's forming.
To me, so it's significant either that Peter said what he said, or Luke puts it into his mouth. This is what he says. It's not long. It's not elaborate. And again, I think it's powerful. And then Cornelius and all of his clan have an experience, and they're shocked, stunned, and then they baptize them, and
Yeah.
it's a weird moment
Yeah.
that doesn't fit with our current vibe, or my older current vibe of having an altar call, walking someone down the aisle, and saying, I want to accept Jesus as my Lord and
It
Savior.
raises all kinds of questions
Tons.
for 21st century,
Yeah.
especially evangelical Christians, because nothing happens in the order you would expect it
Right.
to happen if you were raised in churches like I think the three of us were.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Scott is
Well, speaking of the order, the to me the most striking thing is how it begins, that God has taken note of Cornelius before any of this happens. God is responding, doing this for Cornelius. It says that God saw how Cornelius was living. He feared God and he was generous with the poor. Just those two things. That's it. And because he did those two things, God recognizes Cornelius as a just man, as a good man, essentially. And the way the story unfolds, this is God's way of communicating that to Cornelius, that I'm hearing you, that I'm taking note of you, and I accept you. And Cornelius didn't, say, Lord, save me from my sins or anything. It's just he's living his life being a just human being, and that catches God's attention.
Which doesn't really fit with, one of the most prominent strands going forward in Christian theology is that there's no such thing as a good person, that you can't impress God by trying to be good or just or righteous. And it is interesting that here you've got somebody who is described in those terms. This is not somebody this is not Saul, the sinner who needs to repent and change his ways.
He's a
somebody
righteous
who's like already
man.
there.
Yeah. Which, as pastors, we would go, that's the kind of guy we want in church, right?
Yeah.
He's exactly what you would want.
Yeah.
He gives generously to change the circumstances of the people in the community.
Yeah.
And
they won't let him,
and praise
even let him
regularly.
all the way into the temple.
And prays regularly. Doesn't defer to the pastor. Well, we'll let the pastor pray.
And clearly he's not practicing Judaism.
No.
He
So
couldn't-
we'll talk about,
Yeah.
we've got to talk about this because the whole notion, it uses the phrase, he's a God-fearer, a God-fearing person, a God-fearer. And that phrase, there's tons of scholarship around that idea from the first century. So we'll get into that here in a few minutes. I think we said this already, or at least hinted at it, but up until this point, the church has been growing. I'm not sure they're even using that word yet, but this Christian movement, this movement of Jesus followers has been growing, but it's been growing almost exclusively with Jewish people. So it starts in Jerusalem, and hundreds or thousands of people are kind of flocking into the movement, and they're believing in Jesus, and they're being baptized, and they're receiving the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues. But this really is the first Gentile family, the first Gentile person with a name, who is clearly and explicitly welcomed into the movement, baptized, receives the Holy Spirit, just like the Jewish Christians had. And from here, like I said, this is kind of where the ball starts rolling, but this is the story for the rest of the book of Acts. Paul's missionary journeys start shortly after this, and the focus shifts almost completely from this being a Jewish movement, a sect within Judaism, into something broader, something wider, something with totally open borders that's for all kinds of people. And that's kind of the story, the overarching story that Acts tells.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the hinge point on which it swings.
Yeah, Peter's notion, I now perceive, is like, that is
some things
the
become
hinge.
clear to Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the way it is in Greek is I have comprehended a truth.
Yeah.
I mean, something has just clicked for me that never clicked before. And what was it that clicked? That God embraces every human being equally. That's the truth that he perceives all of a sudden.
And
People, getting back to what you were saying, what it says, not only people, but who are acting like Cornelius acts, who are good people, which, again, in our theology, there was no one good.
Yeah.
So if Peter saying that, then the hint is maybe there's lots of good people all over the place.
Yeah, that God
Maybe there's a
notices.
good Muslim, and God's going.
Well, traveling in Egypt, I met a lot of Muslims that were a whole lot kinder and more patient and accepting than some Christians I've met.
This story has been important for lots of Christians. It has been kind of a touchstone in the LGBT movement for LGBT Christians. Certainly, I think the idea of don't call unclean what God has called clean. Like, don't worry so much about the categories you've been taught to respect. Think more or pay more attention to how people act, to what they do, to how they use the resources they have, to how they treat other people. And so I think of the LGBT community when I read this story. I know there are other, certainly we could think of times or places where people have been excluded because of skin color or ethnicity or the language they speak from Christian communities. And I think this passage has often been one that said, like, haven't we moved past this? Didn't we move past this 2,000 years ago when Peter realized that this movement was for everyone? But it's one of those issues that keeps coming up in the church, one of those things.
And do you think it's intentional on Luke's part, or do you just think it's that it just wasn't told? Getting back to that idea, he just sees this. He's not told all of this is clean. He's just told take and eat. So do we need God to say this person, but not this person? Or can we read this in that way? That, I mean, that's certainly not on the radar of the LG.
No, that's not.
Do we just recognize
the vision doesn't say Gentiles either?
Right.
It's
is it just a recognition?
Yeah, Peter has to extrapolate.
Yeah.
This truth becomes self-evident to him. Wow.
If the animals don't matter, then
the
this
people don't
category
matter.
certainly, like, if I can eat a lizard, surely I can touch a Gentile.
I'm still saying I'm going to eat the lizard.
Well,
but you're allowed to. If you want to eat a lizard, you can.
And then you have the story of the Ethiopian eunuch, which he's a Gentile plus he's a eunuch, which means he's his physical sexual organs have been altered, so he's trans technically.
Yeah,
and there again, the Holy Spirit, is.
Okay, I just want to note, Scott has hit his microphone a bunch of times when we've recorded this podcast. I think that's the first time he's ever hit someone else.
Did I hit somebody?
You hit somebody else's mic. You have passed the 3.5 already, so but that's all right.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Let me try again there.
No, that was great. I don't think the point stands, and I think you made it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm curious about is, so the Ethiopian eunuch is another famous story from the book of Acts, and you just described it. It's a Gentile, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a Gentile who's baptized, and yet this is the story that's often described as the first Gentile Christians. So is it the Holy Spirit that's the difference between those two stories?
Well, what's the Ethiopian eunuch doing? He's reading a Jewish prophet, which,
right.
How did he get a copy of a Jewish prophet?
And how do you read a scroll in a chariot?
Books R Us wasn't around. Yeah. But he's got one, and he's reading it, and God God responds to the eunuch by sending Philip his way.
Right.
So again, it's not that Philip went out to evangelize this eunuch. It's that God is trying to get his people to accept
Yeah.
these people. It's a
People are asking questions,
They are.
and
These
somebody needs to go talk to them.
this is God setting the agenda. Like, hey, there's people out there, and I've already accepted them.
Yeah.
I already embraced them, and you can't see that. Peter recognizes that all of a sudden. Whoa, I now comprehend a truth that I didn't comprehend before.
Yeah. I think you're right that this story is about Peter just as much, or maybe more, than it's about Cornelius and his family. God already receives
And
and
in
loves
a
them.
sense, the
And he
insolent-
disappears, and Peter goes on. So that's where I would look at it and say, well, the story flow is the transition or the transformation of Peter, not Cornelius.
Yeah.
So
And
Yeah,
I
I think
think
you're right.
there's a deeper message here that's probably true for all religious communities, but because the church was a Jewish movement, moving outside of the Jewish context would not have been a natural inclination.
Right.
If you have
You have 1,000 years of religious teaching that says this is what we do, this is how we do it, these are things we don't do, and God told us this is
and I don't
how
think
it's supposed to be.
I don't think the early Jesus movement perceived that it would compel them outside of the Jewish environment. I don't think.
No, it comes as a surprise.
right.
To
And
Peter.
so what do we do? Because this guy obviously has made a conscious decision. I'm not getting circumcised.
Yeah.
So how do we? I mean, that had to be going through Peter's brain, don't you think? Of going, something weird has happened here. How do we? Because wouldn't the inclination have been as a Jew to say, well, you need to be circumcised and you need to do X, Y, Z.
Right. I know that was the answer.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There are Jewish believers there when this encounter with Peter and Cornelius happens, and in the Greek text, it's translated that. Well, the translation is, and they were astonished at what happened. But that Greek word, it's more like their brains were fried. I mean, in a colloquial sense, that's like it has this idea of it drove them to insanity is another flavor of that word. It's like it created major cognitive dissonance is what happened. They could not.
This idea that they're not excited necessarily.
They are
Maybe
not-
they're excited.
They're
but
not rejoicing. They're like, what?
Yeah, it feels wrong. It feels disturbing. It feels like the carpet's been pulled out from under them. And I think that is really important to me. This story sets the movement on a trajectory. I read this as this idea that God's love is for everyone, that this is clear evidence in the Bible that this movement is supposed to just keep opening up wider and welcoming more and more people in. But I'm very sympathetic to people who can't read it that way, or who can read this as, yes, well, it says this story means that Gentiles can be part of this movement. It doesn't mean anything beyond that.
Right.
And I think everybody has their limits. Like everybody sets their limits at some point. The people they can't accept, whether kind of subconsciously or explicitly, the people they can't imagine that God would love or welcome or bless. And I think it's incredibly uncomfortable when those ideas are challenged, when those truths the things you thought were true are
really not.
Might not be, when those are called into question. Like that's an astounding, uncomfortable, painful thing.
Yeah, it would be fair to say what they experienced was truly cognitive dissonance. It was. There's no evidence that they were the Jewish believing observers were super happy about this. There's no indication in the text that they were like,
No, I mean, we'll spend the next 3 chapters. Peter spends the rest of the book kind of trying to justify it, telling the story over and over again. Like, no, people, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, and it leads to these controversial councils, right?
Yeah.
Where they're trying to like come up with rules for how to deal with this.
yeah.
Institutional solutions.
And just I think what you're seeing is just how far do we go?
Yeah.
You know, if we let them or we do this, then what's next? And at some point there has to be a barrier. We can't. I mean, that's just unnatural to say, nope.
But see,
It's everybody.
Here's the thing: it's God is doing the acting here. God is the one setting the agenda, and God is the one giving the people the cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
And God's out there way ahead of all these folks, even Peter, really. And what God is, the mandate here is we better catch up with God. God doesn't even need us to evangelize. He's already got people out there that he's accepted. And you're foolish if you think by you inviting them to follow Christ, that's what does it. No, there's already people I recognize, which is what it said he did with Cornelius. He recognized him. He embraced him way ahead of time.
Yeah.
And that is disturbing to the Christian mindset, I think.
I think it's disturbing to almost anybody. Like, in my head, when the question is asked, how far do we go? Like, so who all can come in? I want to say, like, everybody, like, go all the way, just keep going. But I also know I can't think of an example off the top of my head, or at least not a clear one. But I also know that emotionally, there's going to be a point where I can't keep saying, yeah, it doesn't matter. Just let them in, whatever. Like, at some point I'll hit that, like you said, a barrier. I'll hit that moment where there's some person I can't accept, some behavior I can't look past, or some way of being that just does not seem blessed by God to me. And I think that's the whole tension kind of at the heart of the beginning of the Christian movement is, you've got this one, some people saying, this is for everybody. And then you also have to sustain that and to figure out, okay, then who are we and who are we not? And what does it mean to be part of this community? And you have to set boundaries or rules or identifiers around that. And it's like these things are constantly in tension. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, well, and then with Peter, what happens at this point, he recognizes this truth, right? He comprehends a new truth. But what does he do a little bit later? He reverses. He reverts back to his way of life before. He stops eating with Gentiles.
Yeah.
So it shows how powerful that impulse is to insulate ourselves from others.
But couldn't that be who he was with? I mean, if he's got his groupies, Peter's groupies, and he acknowledges this is okay, then they're going to go, oh, Peter says that, so it must be okay. But if Peter's with
James,
and equal, and James goes,
I don't do that.
Yeah, then Peter's going to go, maybe in this case, I'll go, well, they can sit at that table.
which is interesting, right? You've got two of Jesus' disciples at odds. Original disciples, Peter and James, because James is clearly a leader in Jerusalem,
Right.
and that conflict continues, and Paul becomes,
Yeah, we talked about it a lot in our Galatians 2 episode, because Paul describes Peter's arc in less sympathetic terms than Acts does. It's kind of the same story. Paul says clearly, like, Peter, you used to sit, I've seen you eat with Gentiles. You know this is the gospel. But now I see you've betrayed it. Like, you're not doing it because of of your because of who you're around.
Yeah,
Because James
and
is
what
there.
was his betrayal? It wasn't that he quit believing in Jesus or anything, right?
No,
He
it was he
betrayed
quit
the
eating with
gospel
Gentiles.
because he stopped eating with Gentiles.
Yeah.
That was the measure of his orthodoxy, of his your faith. Your faith is measured by or your lack of faith is being measured by the fact you quit embracing the other openly and freely.
Which would be running counter to God's vision. If God has a vision and you start altering it and saying, well, no, it's this way, then you're usurping that authority, right? And I think that's what we inherently do. We can't perceive God's vision, God's aim.
Yeah.
It has to have boundaries. But that's where I always look at it and say, God's probably a lot more graceful than I give him credit for, that I give God credit for. And God's probably got a much bigger vision. And I always try to be mindful that I probably am screwing God's vision up much more
Sure.
than I'm comprehending.
Yeah.
I mean, because I, again, growing up, being a good person, I understand that. And that gets to that question. I didn't cuss, didn't smoke, didn't do drugs, didn't do any of this kind of stuff. I recognized that was for show. That's what the church was like. Jay's a good kid. Uh-huh. And I was like, well, I can step into that role. That's fine. I can be that. But I always knew, that's not what God's looking at. But then I also know that when I couldn't stand somebody, that I was unkind, mean, willing to stab a friend in the back, that's where God was like, so what about this? Or you don't smoke, you don't drink, but you sure do talk behind people's back. I was like, well, dang it. Yeah. That's yeah.
And I think there's some, I think the question people are often asking when they say wait, but then how far does this go? How far do we carry this logic? I think one of the questions implicit, often a question that's being asked is, then why are we doing all this stuff? Why are we coming to church? Why aren't we smoking and cussing and drinking? If that's not what God cares about, why aren't we being circumcised? Why are we bothering to be circumcised, to get baptized, to go to church every Sunday morning? If God's saying, I already care about these people who aren't doing any of that. What does that mean for our churches? What does that mean for our institutions? What does that mean for our kids?
And my answer to that is to pursue the natural implications of that truth that Peter discovered. Okay, if God does accept, then I need to be an agent of bridging those gaps in this world because they haven't yet been bridged.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
I mean, we live in a world that's defined by human alienation.
Yeah. But that's a very different vision of the religious life than what most people have been exposed to or been taught. It sounds like we've got plenty to talk about, but let's take a quick break and then we'll continue the conversation.
We want to thank you for listening to the Unholy Bible Study Podcast. Today, instead of a short break, we will be taking a week break on this episode because we had so much fun talking about it. We have decided to divide it into 2 episodes. So join us next week as we continue our discussion on Acts chapter 10.